The trial of the prosecutor versus Dominic Ongwen continued from 30th October until 30th November 2017 at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. During this time, a total of 15 witnesses were called by the Office of the Prosecutor to give their testimony in relation with the Lord's Resistance Army and Dominic Ongwen. The alleged former commander of the Senior Brigade of the LRA is accused of 70 counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity allegedly committed during attacks against the civilian population in Lukodi, Pajule, Odek, and Abok IDP camps between October 2003 and June 2004. Since opening its case on 16th January 2017, the prosecution has called 53 witnesses. The witnesses are first questioned by the Office of the Prosecutor, then by the legal representatives of victims, and finally by the defense. Mr. Ongwen is represented by a defense team led by Defense Counsel Crispus Ayena Odongo. The defense conducts its own investigations and has the right to examine prosecution witnesses. Between 30th October and 30th November 2017, 15 witnesses were called by the prosecution, including former LRA abductees, former LRA forced wives, a Uganda People Defense Force officer, a Uganda Police Force sergeant, forensic expert in DNA analysis, and forensic audio expert. During this evidentiary block, most of the witnesses testified about what they endured back in 2003-2004 during the attacks in the Lukodi, Pajule, Odek, and Abok IDP camps. Accordingly, Dick Okot, also known as witness P0067, recounted that morning of the 10th October 2003 in Pajule IDP camp.
Please describe what happened after you heard gunshots.
What then happened was that there was a gun battle and the UPDF soldiers retreated to the barracks, which was in Lapul. They were no longer there on the Pajule side. Then the LRA fighters came and started breaking into people's houses. They broke into shops.
On his side, Mr. Robson Oper, also known as witness P0286, recounted events that happened on 8th June 2004 in Abok IDP camp when he was abducted.
During the exchanges, those who had gone into their houses, most of them came out and ran away. They ran and left me in the house. I had a problem with my leg. I could not run. I came out of the house. I wanted to run, but I could not. The rebels caught me at the doorpost. They fired 3 bullets, but none of them caught me. I fell down. I rolled. I continued rolling and dodged the bullets. The rebels caught me, tied me, and asked me, "Do I kill you?" I pleaded with them, told them, "Please leave me, let me go and work with you. I am still young, I can work with you, please don't kill me."
In its pre-trial brief, the Office of the Prosecution alleges that LRA fighters deprived civilians of their liberty by abducting hundreds of them and making them carry food items and other equipment that they had looted from the camps. In doing so, LRA fighters, including Dominic Ongwen, allegedly exercised powers attaching to the right of ownership over the abductees. Following the attacks that took place in the IDP camps, several witnesses were asked about the abduction during these attacks. Protected witness P0138, who was abducted by the LRA, testified about the role of abducted individuals in the organization.
What role would people abducted at this age between 10 and 17, what role would they play in the LRA?
Most of these people in the LRA were used as trainees. They were taught to become fighters, but at the outset, they would help carry luggage, especially smaller luggages, while also being trained to become soldiers. After 3 to 4 months, after they've assessed and determined that you're not going to be able to escape and go back home, then you'd be armed. You'd be given a gun, and then you'd become a LRA soldier. If that does not happen, you'd be taken to training in Sudan. You'd be trained in Sudan. You'd stay in Sudan for about 1 or 2 years, and then sent back to Uganda to fight. But most times, people that age were abducted and sent to Sudan for training. They were rarely trained in Uganda. They were mostly taken to Sudan, but as soon as you're abducted, you're trained to become a soldier.
And Mr. Witness, what did you understand to be the overall purpose of the LRA? Why were they abducting people and training them to be fighters?
They stated it clearly that the way Kony trains his people or his soldiers was in order for them to go and overthrow Museveni's government so that he can become the president of Uganda.
Questioned about his own abduction, witness P0138 stated that he received training within the LRA and explained about LRA's organization and leaders such as Joseph Kony, Vincent Oti, and Thomas Kwoyelo. When referring to the Pajule attack, the witness talked about abductees in the LRA and gave more details about the types of individuals that the LRA would abduct.
Mr. Witness, I want to move back to the topic of abductions. You've told us that the LRA abducted people, including people 10 and onward. Can you tell us more about what types of people were abducted? Was it men and women, or just one or the other?
The LRA would abduct male boys as well as female girls. If you're 15 to or 10 to 17, you'd be abducted. They would not leave you.
And what role did female girls play in the LRA?
The girls that were abducted by the LRA were mostly abducted to become, you'd be given out to different brigades, you'd be distributed to different brigades, and when the time is ready, for example, after 6 months, then they would be given to their husbands. And that's what they used to do with girls in the LRA. They would be distributed to their husbands. Nobody was allowed to abduct their own wives, or nobody would select their own husbands. You'd be abducted, you'd stay there for about 6 months, and then be given to a husband.
Another witness, witness P006, a victim of Pajule IDP camp attacks, recounted that during her abduction, she was asked to carry luggage, which she described as the decapitated head of an abductee.
Yes.
The reason why I said that among the luggage that I was made to carry, I carried body parts, was because on one occasion, I hadn't yet been in the bush for a long time. Some man was abducted. He was trying to escape. When he was reapprehended, we were told the newly abductees were instructed to kill this man. But they instructed the newly abducted men, to kill this guy. But the girls were not. And they told us that when the man was killed, he was chopped into bits. And they told us that we should carry this man's body parts to frighten us, so that if we attempt to escape, we would also undergo the same fate.
The prosecution alleges that from at least 1st July 2002 and 31st December 2005, the accused was a military commander in the LRA, commanding units first at the battalion and then at the brigade level. Throughout this period, the accused rose in rank, position, and authority. The accused allegedly served as a battalion commander in the senior brigade from mid-2002 to March 2004. And this meant that he allegedly had control of activities of the unit that he supervised and contributed to the overall operations of the senior brigade. Witness P0231, a former LRA abductee, testified about Dominic Ongwen's position in the LRA and what kind of a commander he was. When asked whether the accused had intervened to save the lives of LRA individuals who were to be executed under the order of Joseph Kony, the witness said,
"Yeah, Okonyo.
Yes, he did help to spare the lives. The assistance, for example, I can give is one of the commanders known as Caesar Chalam. He should have been executed as well. He was not killed. Another person who was rescued was myself, and then another person also is Okema Vincent. We came back together with him. Unfortunately, he's now deceased. Another person who was spared is Ojok Alex. He should have been executed as well. There were also other people who should have been executed, but the kind of intervention that Dominic gave, he was one of the few people who could do such interventions.
In the OTP pretrial brief, Dominic Ongwen is also criminally charged with sexual and gender-based crimes. According to the OTP, these crimes included implementing a common plan to abduct girls and women to serve as domestic servants, forced exclusive conjugal partners, and sex slaves, which also allegedly result in the commission of rape and torture between 1st July 2002 and 31st December 2005. Several witnesses testified about these sexual gender-based crimes. They recounted about their abduction and how they were given to LRA commanders as wives. They also testified about sexual violence against women abductees and forced wives in the LRA. Referring to her previous statement, witness P0351 testified that the accused gave her to one of his commanders and that she couldn't refuse.
Madam Witness, you told us that one of Odomi's escorts came to tell you that the commanders were asking for you. When you went there, Odomi was sitting with other commanders that he liked. And Odomi told you that you were now the wife of one of these commanders. Could you have said no to Odomi when he told you that?
I couldn't say no.
Why not?
Because in the bush, the life we led in the bush was such that you did not have authority. You could not object to what you were told.
What would happen if you had objected to Odomi?
I feared they would kill me.
During her cross-examination, she also testified that she stayed in Dominic Ongwen's house where she did domestic chores.
So we shall now move to your stay in the household of Dominic Ongwen. When you stayed with Dominic Ongwen, did you study him as a person or as a child, at least?
Yes. When I was in Dominic's household, we would not stay near him. Most times we would be doing domestic chores, and knowing what he would be doing and then what he would be thinking of was difficult for us to do.
According to your assessment, Madam Witness, was he a kind man?
Yes.
Following the attacks on the IDP camps, several witnesses testified about the impact that these attacks and abduction into the bush have had on their lives even years later after the events. On that matter, witnesses were questioned by the LRV, Legal Representatives of Victims. Pursuant Article 68 of the Rome Statute, views and concerns of the victims and witnesses are presented and considered at appropriate stages of the proceedings in a manner which is not prejudicial to or inconsistent with the rights of the accused and a fair and impartial trial. Accordingly, witnesses were questioned by the legal representatives of victims about their economical, physical, and emotional well-being following the events that occurred and that changed their lives. Witness P0275 recounted about such impact.
The impact of my abduction on my family and the events that happened brought a lot of change. I believe that things will never be the same in my family because there are certain things that perhaps I could have done to improve the lives of my family. It's no longer possible. Now we have a lot of problems. There are certain people who, for example, my brothers, who had children, who left children behind, who are survived by children. The children are now grown up. They want to go to school, but it's extremely difficult for them to go to school because they cannot afford it.
Mr. Douglas Richard Obwor, also known as witness P0306, testified about community life in Abok IDP camp and the aftermath of the attack.
What happened as an impact of that conflict was that people were, brought a lot of worries, a lot of, as people were thinking about their lost friends, lost relatives, because people were buried together. And the worst was that many of the people who died left children who are now orphans and not going to school.
Regarding his emotional well-being, the witness said that he has suffered as a result of the attack.
Yes, I do. As a leader, I was a leader, and people had a lot of hope in me. And there are people who lost their lives. When I see children, orphans, I see widows do not have any means of livelihood. I really, it pains me because it reminds me of what happened.
Witness P0006, a victim of Pajule attacks, testified about her experience during those attacks as well as the aftermath of the attacks. Regarding the impact the attacks had on her life, she said,
all these things, all the things that happened to me have had a very negative impact on my life. It's caused me a lot of problems. I'm a young person, but I now have a child. And that causes me a lot of worry and a lot of stress as to how I'm going to be able to take care of my child. And up to now, I still worry. I'm now grown up, but I still worry about how I'm going to take care of my child.
Were you able to be even make friends during your time in the bush? Somebody you could confide in?
I did make friends, but the person I became friendly with was, I had to be very sly because I could not discuss every single thing with the person. I would hold back some things because if I thought that if I would tell her everything that was going on in my life, if I disclosed a lot of personal information, she might take the information back. So we only discussed general matters, things that were happening generally in the bush. And I'm not able to provide enough assistance. The little assistance that I'm able to get and send to my parents, I send so that they can use it to help my child. No. That's not how I do it. I do not do it openly. I give it secretly. I send the money secretly so that my partner or husband does not know that I'm sending money to my parents to help my other child.
What were your dreams and ambitions before you were abducted?
Before I was abducted, I wanted to grow up and become a teacher.
What do you expect from this court?
What I expect from the court is justice. And secondly, I would like to ask the court if it's possible so that the court can assist the children who are fatherless, children who do not have homes, and also the children who are still being born in the bush at the moment. If those children at some point are able to come back home, then my prayer to the court is that the court should ensure justice and also should try as much as possible that for the children, the fatherless children who come back home, if there's any way of helping those children, perhaps get a land so that they can help those children, and when they come home, the children would have a future.
Mr. Robson Oper also testified about attacks in the Abok IDP camp as well as the impact those attacks had on him. He later escaped the bush and returned home. He testified about the emotional impact the attacks and abduction had on him.
Since you have returned, once you were home, did thoughts of what have you lived through in the bush come to you? Do you have nightmares? Did you have nightmares?
When I returned home, I had nightmares. There are times I would have a nightmare that I had been re-abducted and taken back to the bush. I would scream, crying at night, imagining that it was real. The nightmares went on but reduced when later on they took me to a center reception center for those who have been victims of abduction so that we can be rehabilitated. They took us there and they tried to share some words to enable us heal from the nightmares.
Have you gotten any assistance, psychological or otherwise, because of these nightmares or other harm that you might have suffered in the bush?
I got some assistance in counseling. I was counseled. They talked to me and they told me not to be thinking about what has happened in my life, the bad things that happened in my life. I was encouraged to be strong and assured that it would not happen again. I was told to pray continuously, and whenever I have the nightmare, after waking up, I would kneel down and pray, and to ensure that the nightmare doesn't come back. Every time the nightmare happens, I would pray, and slowly I was able to get rid of the nightmare.
Did you ever link these nightmares with Chen?
The nightmares were mainly about being re-abducted and taken back to the bush. I would tell people about my nightmare, but they would tell me to pray. They told me that some of the evil spirits that you come across in the bush are the ones that are trying to look for you. And if you are not, you don't have faith, they would come and disturb you. So you should pray so that they don't come back to you again.
During this evidentiary block, in addition to the evidence heard from witnesses of attacks, the prosecution presented to the chamber 2 witnesses who testified about intercepting LRA communications. In its pretrial brief, the prosecution addresses LRA radio communications as a means through which LRA members communicated and transmitted orders. By means of this LRA intercepted communication, details about LRA organization, hierarchy, command structures, rules, among other issues are made known. Witness P0339, a UPDF soldier specialized in communication interception, testified about the process of intercepting LRA communication, as well as how to break LRA communication code, which the LRA used during the radio communication. Audio excerpts were played to the witness, and later he was questioned about them. A UPF sergeant specialized in interception communication, Mr. Nyero Patrick Lumumba, also testified about intercepting LRA communications, and he identified voices of LRA individuals who spoke when he intercepted LRA communications.
I want to focus on the commanders. What names do you remember? What commanders do you remember spoke on the radio?
LRA leader, Joseph Kony.
Others?
Others was Vincent Ochi, Dominic Ongwen, Lakati, Sam Kolo, Orenga Sisto Abudema, Okunga Alero, Opiru Anaka, and others.
how did you identify LRA commanders who spoke on the radio?
I was able to identify them or penetrate them simply because the LRA were somewhat loose in their communication and would at times call their commanders using their own name.
Mr. Nyero also testified about the procedure that he followed when intercepting LRA communications, including the code languages used to break the codes and saving the communication. He also went into details about LRA radio communication habits as he understood them. During his cross-examination, the witness clarified about what he had testified about LRA leader Joseph Kony and how he called his commanders during the radio communications.
Kony himself actually would make it easy to me and to me to understand the first name of some of his commander by calling it the way they actually call some first name. Like Vincent. In Acholi, they call it Binany, that is Binany. Second one is first name Dominic. In Acholi, they call it Odomi, and that is how he was calling some of these commanders. And it would be very easy to me to know that it is true his meaning so and so.
The prosecution also called 2 forensic expert witnesses, one forensic expert in audio enhancing and the other forensic expert in DNA analysis testified before the chamber. Mr. Robert French, a forensic specialist in audio enhancing, testified about audio enhancing audio files that he received from the OTP about LRA intercepted communication. He explained how he made the audio material as audible as possible. He also said that he was careful that the enhancement procedure didn't change the original audio file's content and that he compared the enhanced version with the original audio file. Audio excerpts were played to him, followed by questions. Mr. Art Klosterman, forensic expert in DNA analysis at the Netherlands Forensic Institute, was called to testify about 3 reports that he had to produce for the prosecution in relation to DNA analysis on the accused and other persons. In its pretrial brief, the prosecution argues that the DNA kinship analysis indicates that Dominic Ongwen fathered children while in the LRA. Asked in detail about the process of collecting DNA samples and conducting DNA analysis, Mr. Klosterman confirmed that the results showed that the accused was most likely the father of several children, with the probability being 99.99%. The trial in the case against Dominic Ongwen resumed on Monday, 15th January 2018, with the testimony of the 54th prosecution witness.